Welcome to XRP Ledger, and today we are going deep on a story that has two chapters, and most people in this community only know the first one. Chapter 1. Goldman Sachs disclosed a position of $153.8 million in spot XRP ETFs in its fourth quarter 2025 filing. Chapter 2. Goldman Sachs exited that entire position in the first quarter of 2026. And here is why Chapter 2 is actually more bullish for XRP than Chapter 1 ever was. I want you to stay with me through this entire breakdown, because at the 7-minute mark, I am going to show you exactly what happened to XRP ETF inflows in the weeks after Goldman Sachs exited its position, and why the institutions that replaced Goldman's capital in the weeks that followed sent a signal that most people in this community have completely missed. But first, let us establish what the Goldman Sachs position actually was. Because the numbers require context to understand their significance, Goldman Sachs disclosed a $153.8 million position in spot XRP ETFs as of December 31, 2025. This was spread across 4 funds, approximately $40 million in the Bitwise XRP ETF, $38.5 million in Franklin Templeton XRPZ, $38 million in Grayscale GXRP, and $36 million in 21 shares TOXR. That $153.8 million position represented approximately 73% of the total top 30 disclosed institutional XRP ETF holdings at that time, which stood at approximately $211 million across all institutions. Goldman Sachs was not just invested in XRP ETFs. Goldman Sachs was the dominant institutional holder of XRP ETF exposure in the entire market at the end of 2025. Now let us talk about what happened next, because this is the chapter most people missed. In its most recent 13F filing, reported in mid-May of 2026, Goldman Sachs disclosed that it had fully exited its entire $154 million XRP ETF position during the first quarter of 2026. Goldman retained a large Bitcoin ETF position of approximately $700 million and shifted toward other crypto infrastructure plays, but exited XRP entirely. The community read that headline and felt uncertainty. They should have felt the opposite. Here is why. Goldman Sachs exited $154 million of XRP ETF exposure in the first quarter of 2026. And in the week ending May 11th through May 15th, after Goldman had already exited, XRP spot ETFs recorded $60.5 million in weekly net inflows, the strongest single week of 2026. Goldman sold in $60.5 million of new institutional capital, immediately replaced it and then some. That is not a sign of institutional retreat from XRP. That is a sign of institutional rotation. Old capital exiting, new and larger capital entering in the same asset through the same regulated vehicles. Now let us talk about the 1,220% spike, because this is the number that puts the Goldman exit story in its proper context. For the week ending approximately May 9th through May 11th of 2026, CoinShares weekly data showed that XRP investment products recorded $39.6 million in inflows, a 1,220% increase from approximately $3 million the prior week. 1,220% week-over-week increase. The prior week Goldman was exiting, and the following week XRP investment products saw a 1,220% inflow spike. The capital that replaced Goldman was not retail money chasing a trend. It was institutional capital that had been waiting for the Goldman exit to create room in the order book, positioning at prices that Goldman's exit helped compress, before the Clarity Act committee vote on May 14th delivered the catalyst that the new entrants had been waiting for. This is how sophisticated institutional capital operates. The naive reading of the Goldman exit is that a smart institution saw something wrong with XRP and sold. The sophisticated reading is that Goldman took profits on a position it built in 2025. An institutional capital that understood the May 14th catalyst better than Goldman's equity desk was ready to absorb every share Goldman was selling. Now let us talk about what was happening on the ground on April 24th of 2026, because this data point connects the institutional ETF story to the real-world utility picture in a way that most people are not calculating. On April 24th of 2026, $900 million in tokenized real-world assets settled on the XRP Ledger in a single day. $900 million in one day on a ledger that the broader crypto market still largely associates with cross-border payments from 2017. The institutions driving that volume include Ondo Finance, Guggenheim, Open Eden, Arcax, and Just Token. These are not blockchain startups. These are regulated institutional players making deliberate decisions to use the XRP Ledger as their settlement infrastructure for real-world asset transactions. And here is the connection that most people are missing. Goldman Sachs exited XRP ETFs in the first quarter of 2026. At approximately the same time, $900 million in tokenized assets were settling on the XRP Ledger in a single day. 1,220% weekly inflow spikes were happening in XRP investment products, and the Clarity Act was advancing toward the most significant bipartisan committee vote in crypto history. Goldman's equity desk made a trading decision. The institutions building tokenization infrastructure on the XRP Ledger made an infrastructure decision. Trading decisions are reversible. Infrastructure decisions are not. Now let us talk about the broader tokenization picture, because the April 24th number did not exist in isolation. Real-world assets on the XRP Ledger grew by 875% in the 30 days surrounding that single-day $900 million settlement. The total value of tokenized real-world assets on XRPL reached $3.53 billion, a new all-time high. The Arcax exchange in the United Kingdom has publicly committed to bringing an additional $1 billion in tokenized assets to the XRP Ledger by the end of 2026. This is a licensed, regulated institution making a public, verifiable commitment to building on the XRP Ledger at institutional scale. Australia's Reserve Bank ran real pilot wholesale central bank digital currency on the XRP Ledger as part of Project Acacia, testing live settlement of tokenized bonds with JP Morgan custody and RLUSD. This is a central bank testing real money on the XRP Ledger. Kyobu Life in South Korea is moving tokenized government bond settlement onto the XRP Ledger infrastructure. Traditional bond settlement takes days. The XRP Ledger processes those same transactions in 3 to 5 seconds. These developments did not make Goldman Sachs reconsider its exit, and that is precisely the point. Goldman's 13F filing reflects trading decisions made in January and February of 2026. Before the Australia Central Bank pilot was widely reported, before the $900 million single-day RWA settlement on April 24th, before the May 14th bipartisan committee vote that advanced the Clarity Act 15-9. Goldman exited before the catalysts arrived. The institutions that replaced Goldman's capital did not. Now let us talk about the supply picture, because the Goldman exit story becomes most significant when you overlay it on the supply compression data. Exchange reserves have dropped from 3.76 billion XRP to approximately 1.66 billion XRP since October 2025. That is a 56% decline in liquid supply in under 8 months. Whale wallets controlling 68.5% of circulating supply are holding their positions in private custody. ETF funds hold approximately 886.8 million XRP in regulated custody. When Goldman sold its $154 million XRP ETF position, the ETF funds did not reduce their XRP holdings. The authorized participants who manage ETF creation and redemption processed Goldman's sale without removing XRP from custody, because other institutional buyers absorbed Goldman's ETF shares without triggering large-scale XRP liquidations. The supply compression was not interrupted by Goldman's exit. It continued through it. And the $60.5 million weekly inflow record that followed Goldman's exit added to ETF custody. XRP that is now locked in regulated institutional vaults and not available for sale on exchanges. Now let us connect the Goldman story to the Clarity Act timeline, because the August 10th deadline adds the urgency dimension that makes everything else more significant. The Clarity Act advanced from the Senate Banking Committee 15-9 on May 14th. The full Senate needs 60 votes. Senate recess begins August 10th. The effective legislative window closes around mid-July. Goldman Sachs exited before the committee vote, before the July 4th target crystallized as the signing deadline, before the August 10th recess created the now or never pressure on Senate leadership. The institutions that entered after Goldman's exit positioned with full knowledge of the August 10th timeline, with full knowledge of the bipartisan committee result, with full knowledge of the 7 Democratic senators whose crossover votes determine whether the bill passes in 2026 or slips to 2027. Now, I want to address something directly, because this community deserves a rational voice on what the Goldman exit actually means and what it does not mean. Goldman Sachs is not always right. The firm's 13F filings reflect trading decisions made months before they are disclosed. Goldman exiting XRP ETFs in Q1 2026 does not mean Goldman believes XRP will fail. It means Goldman's equity desk made a portfolio allocation decision in January or February, before the most important catalyst of 2026 had materialized. David Schwartz has been consistent about this kind of analysis. The bull case for XRP is built on visible data and measurable institutional adoption, not on what any single institution decides to hold or exit in a given quarter. What the Goldman story tells you is structural. Goldman built a dominant position in XRP ETFs in 2025, exited in Q1 2026, and was immediately replaced by institutional capital that drove a 1,220% weekly inflow spike and a $60.5 million record week. The institutional demand for XRP ETF exposure did not depend on Goldman staying. It accelerated after Goldman left. Now I want to talk about what most people in this community are getting wrong right now. XRP is trading near $1.35 to $1.37. Goldman Sachs exited $154 million of XRP exposure, and the week after Goldman's exit was the strongest XRP ETF inflow week of 2026. $900 million in tokenized assets settled on the XRP Ledger in a single day in April. Australia's central bank ran real pilot money on XRPL, and the retail market is reading the Goldman exit headline as bad news. The Goldman exit is not bad news. It is the opening through which 1,220% weekly inflow growth entered the market. So let us zoom out and see the complete picture assembling right now. Goldman Sachs disclosed $153.8 million in XRP ETFs in Q4 2025. Goldman exited entirely in Q1 2026. The week following Goldman's exit saw a 1,220% weekly inflow spike. Record $60.5 million weekly inflows in May 11 through 15. $900 million in tokenized RWA settled on XRPL in a single day on April 24th. RWA 875% growth in 30 days. $3.53 billion total RWA on XRPL. Australia RBA pilot CBDC on XRPL. South Korea Kyobu life bond settlement on XRPL. Archax $1 billion commitment. ETF cumulative inflows $1.39 billion. Exchange reserves down 56%. Whale wallets 68.5% of circulating supply. Clarity Act advancing toward August 10th deadline. Goldman exited before the catalysts arrived. The 1,220% inflow spike happened after Goldman left. The institutions that replaced Goldman understood something Goldman's trading desk did not see in January. If this analysis changed how you are thinking about what the Goldman exit actually means for XRP, hit like and subscribe. I drop deep dive breakdowns like this twice a day to keep you ahead of the move.